All right, there we are. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our live virtual event with writers Keith McCafferty and Craig Johnson. We're so excited to be here with these mystery masters to discuss Keith's newest book in the Sean Stranahan series, Bangtail Ghost, and also hopefully whet your appetite and heighten your anticipation for the forthcoming new Longmire mystery, Next to Last Stand, which will be out at the end of September. We're delighted to be here also in this virtual space with fellow Books in Common bookstores, Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, and Madison Books in Seattle. I'm Jessica, coming to you from the Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, home of Keith, actually, and just a stone's throw from Craig in Wyoming. Before we get to Keith and Craig, we wanted to point out a few things about this virtual space. We are recording tonight's event, and it will be viewable on booksincommonnw.com, as well as the Books in Common NW YouTube channel. So if you have to leave, and you can tune back in on YouTube to find that, figure out what you missed, get that last clue. There is a buy link in the chat, and you can, there it goes. You can select your favorite sponsoring bookstore to pick up your copies of Keith and Craig's books. Just so you know, Country Bookshelf does have signed copies of Bangtail Ghost, so you can visit us for those. If you have questions for either or both of our authors, just click the Q&A button down there at the bottom, and you can see the questions that other folks have answered and upvote the ones you think are really great. You're also welcome. Some of you have already jumped in to use the chat, so please use that as well. If you run into any tech issues along the way, we recommend first trying to exit and re-enter the Zoom. And if that doesn't work, you can also visit us, because we are, as I said, streaming live on YouTube. So you can find us there as well. We do also want to remind you that this is a shared creative space, that we want to remain safe for everyone that's joined us tonight. So please be respectful, and offensive or inappropriate comments or questions will see the user dismissed from the space. So without further ado, I think I'm going to turn it over to Keith to tell us a little bit more about Bangtail Ghost. What do you think, Keith?
Well, first I want to thank you, Jessica, and Books in Common for sponsoring this for us. To tell the people, it's very important to support our local independent bookstores right now, never more than now. And I sure is nice to see Craig here. I'm surprised to see him. I didn't know until last week that he was going to be here, and it's quite an honor. So I write, if you're not familiar with me, I write the Sean Stranahan series set in Madison Valley in Montana. And the Bangtail Ghost is, I think, about what, the eighth book in the series. If somebody from NPR called it, fly fishing noir, that I'd invented a genre. But the truth is, fly fishing plays a very small part in the book. As a general rule, I like to sort of, like paint small human dramas or comedies against, some kind of larger backdrop issue. In my last book, A Death in Eden, it was, copper mining in the Smith River, or wolves, or one book I wrote has Ernest Hemingway as a backdrop, because I used to fish with his son, Jack, because we were colleagues at Field and Stream. The truth is, I think Craig calls it socially responsible fiction. I think he's used that term. And I sort of feel like that too, but not always. And the truth is, I wanted to write a book about cats, just because I love cats, especially mountain lions. And this was my excuse. And I wanted it, if there is a backdrop issue, it's sort of nature itself and the consequences of our meddling in nature, whether it's habitat destruction or with the animals themselves. I've wanted to do this for many years, and there are really two sort of incidents that that spurred this book. Uh, One occurred just a few years ago when I was going to go sell books at a place called the Malmstrom Air Force Base, which is in Great Falls, Montana. And I had to be fingerprinted and the whole 9 yards, and they escorted me to the commissary. And Craig would be more familiar with this than me, but they had pictures of me 10 feet, like 10 feet wide. I mean, just these huge things. And he said, you have a lot of fans up here, you're gonna sell a lot of books. So I said, sure, I sharpen my pencil or whatever. And nobody came. Just a few people came, and the guy kept coming back to me and saying, sir, I'm really sorry, and I don't know what's going on. Finally, he came back after I'd been there a couple of hours. He said, well, I found out the reason. There's been a mountain lion spotted on the base, and we have a remain in place order. Nobody can leave the door that they're behind. Oh, no. So they gave me an armed escort to my car, and then escorted me out of the Air Force Base by like some back route, because the whole thing was closed down. And I thought, here's a military installation with missile silos all around it, enough ordnance to, destroy a small European country, if not a large one, and it's all brought to a standstill by a cat. Of course, I was rooting for the cat, but they found it in a culvert pipe, and they killed it the next day. So that showed me how primally relevant a carnivore can be. That shows us that we're not the biggest apex predator in the room sometimes. But I really got an interest in writing this long before I even wrote my first book. I was a nightside reporter in Bakersfield, California, which is basically a crime reporter. And Field and Stream magazine, who I worked for at the time and still do, asked me to take a train to Albuquerque and to chase lion with this old man named Orville Fletcher and his hounds. Orville's about 95 now. He's still kicking, so I can't say too much bad about him. But so I went there and I said, I have no interest in hunting mountain lions, none whatsoever. But he said, well, he's chasing this cattle killing cat up around Los Alamos. I just want you to, sit on a mule and write about him, follow him. So I did that. And by God, I never saw a lion. I came back, I wrote the story. And at that point, I had moved to Montana just a few months before. And I was an elk hunter. I was going to go elk hunting up a place called Elkhorn Creek. And I went up there on the day before Thanksgiving, and very cold, snowing. And I stayed up and, until it was pretty close to dark, and I saw elk on the hillside above me. And I had a tag for a bull, and I was trying to grow antlers on him, but I thought, well, there's antlers, or are those just, branches? I knew if I went up there that it was, I was probably not going to get him. And then I'd just be hiking out at night for 3 miles. But I did it anyway, because I operate on guilt. I feel guilty if I didn't do it. And I came back down to the path, and I walked down that path to where it comes to the Gallatin River. And at that point, I would turn right and take another path for a half a mile back to my truck. So I got there and I made a turn to the right, and I heard a growl. And my first thought was, that's a grizzly bear and I'm dead. And I said that because I'd had an encounter with a grizzly not long before. And then it growled again. I thought, no, that's like a truck shifting gears on the other side of the Gallatin River. Then it growled again, and then I could see it. And it was only about 10 feet from me, if that. And it was just stretched out all the way across the tail, or across the trail. And I could see that great big furry tail flopping. And it ran up the hillside above me. Now, pitch dark now. I have a headlight, but I didn't put it on. I'd taken the cartridge out of the rifle because it's safer to walk after dark. So it goes up and it starts to pace back and forth. I can't see it at this point, but it's growling continuously. And so at one point I started walking along and I said, okay, I'm going to put on my headlamp, knowing that it would make me night blind. But so I did it. And then whenever the cat would turn so that its eyes, reflected off that light, they just glowed green. So if you look at the book cover, the only credit I can take for that book cover is they had yellow eyes, and I said, no, you got to make them green because that's the way it is in real life. I've never seen anything like that, or never those eyes. And I walked along, and I at one point I looked out there and I said, well, just get out of here, because I had been bow hunting elk earlier in the season, and I backpacked in by myself for 3 or 4 nights, and I was exhausted. And I came out, and these 2 big German shepherds rushed at me, you know, in the evening, growling. And normally that would have scared me, but I was just so tired, so exhausted. I just said, oh, get out of here. And they just turned and ran. And so I said that to this cat, and it was like I was floating above myself. You know, I was looking down and thinking, well, you know, that just didn't have the same authority as it did when I said it with the dogs. And I knew it wasn't going to change the mountain lion's opinion towards me. So sure enough, I start going back toward the car, and I realized this is like a half a mile, and he's 20 feet from me, growling, and then starts to growl less and less. And then I will swerve that headlight. I don't see the green eyes. And oh, there they are. And then, so it got like that. And I thought, and pretty soon it's dark. I can't see the cat. I can't hear it. I don't know where it is. And I thought, I'm not going to walk another half mile like this. So I backed down to the river and waded across it. And it's got anchor ice, flowing ice on top. And I got out on the far side. And then I'm like, you hear tales of women lifting the tail end of a car to get a baby out, you know, super power. I had that. You know, I'd get to a fence post and I'd just like kick it in half. And a trucker gave me a ride back to my rig. And then I was afraid to walk 100 feet. And so the next day I went out there with my wife and my father, and we tried to read the story in the tracks and found out there were 2 lions, not just one, and that they had swum the Gallatin River and gotten out just as I'd bumped into them, and that they had an old elk kill there, which I didn't know about because I'd gone in before daylight and I couldn't see it. So anyway, that was my lion story. And I always thought, you know, maybe I'll try to use that. But lion sort of became my totem animal after that. So I'm going to try to do something here, and it may not work. Come on. So listen to me. So for all of you out there, this is a lion roaring. Can you hear? Can you hear that?
Yeah.
That's actually the mating call of a lion. It sounds horrific, otherworldly, but it's actually just a lion looking for love.
Well, I feel like it has such a human kind of quality to it.
Oh, it does. A lot of people say it's like a woman screaming and who's lost her child or something. Honest to God, the animals that I was in touch with that night, they didn't scream. They were just growling at me.
There is a huge fundraising debt.
So anyway, I thought I'd end with that. I know Craig wants to talk about his new book, and I'm very much interested to hear about it. Craig, I was up till 1 a.m. last night to finish your last book. Right, The Land of Wolves. And I learned that I thought you had gotten that line from the last line in a very good movie called Sicario or whatever. But I found out I was wrong in reading your book. Anyway, I very much enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Look at that. Yeah, it was interesting to me, like, because when I started hearing about your book, I was like, yeah, we are kind of a little bit on the same trail there. As far as like, you know, one of the things I really enjoy about your books, Keith, is that whenever you go into the natural world, I can trust you. You know, there's so many writers that write about the wild that evidently have never been in it. And, you know, they write about animals and they have them doing things that there's no way those animals would ever respond that way or ever do the things that they have them doing. And that's one of the real things I absolutely love about your books. is that no matter what it is that you happen to be talking about, it'll be coming from, a very assured and knowledgeable position like that. And I don't have to be embarrassed, whenever I'm reading the book, because I know that, you'll be able to come across with the truth, that aligns itself, very much like in the natural world.
Well, thank you very much, Craig. I can say the same thing about you. I used to
Well-
tell people at Penguin Books, why not just hire me for a day to go through the book and tell them what they got wrong, Because often it's some gun thing or something, and it's correctable. It's easy, Just hire me. I'll do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Were you going to say something, Jessica? I'm sorry.
Oh, well,
Go ahead.
I noticed that we did have a question about that in the chat that was sort of wanting you guys to talk about the role that setting plays in both of your books, and how setting them in these iconic, wild, natural places has influenced your writing, and maybe what kind of research you guys do. Like, do you have good travel stories, Craig?
Well, even better than that, I have a mountain lion story like that, and I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version of it really quick here. But what's amazing to me is that my wife Judy has a little store in Buffalo like that, and one of the things we sell is they're these like laminated cards, that fold out, and what they do is they have the different major carnivores that are in Wyoming like that, and then they'll have a map, showing you which part, of, the state, that those animals happen to be in. And of course, grizzly bears mostly up in the north, west corner there, like at, wolves, scattering out a little bit further down, like in some ways into the bighorns. And, it's like these big green patches like that. And then you get to the mountain lion one, and the whole state is a solid square of green. I mean, they are everywhere, and you can't really anticipate, where it is that they might be. And I'll try and do my quickest version of this story that I can like that. But what happened was it was in February, and I was, my wife and I were in bed here at the ranch, and we heard some noise, and it was the cat, our house cat, that was, on the porch, downstairs, and so it's like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I put on my bathrobe and I come downstairs, and the cat, our front door is glass, well, its ass is pushed all the way up against the glass. I mean, it's plastered trying to push its way through the glass, and I'm thinking, what in the heck, something must be out there. She must be fighting with the raccoons again or something. So I open the door and the cat shoots over, it climbs up the sofa and looks out the window. And I'm like, yeah, maybe something more than that. And so I look around, and I can see a straight shot down through the trees and see the barn. And the horses are going ballistic. They're spinning and kicking and doing everything like this, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's not a raccoon. And so the snow is about 3 feet deep. And I see something shoot around the barn and down towards this big cottonwood that's down by the irrigation ditch. And I thought that was bigger than a coyote, that was something else. And so I, pull on my, my Stormy Cromer, leather bomber hat, and I've got my flaps up, like this, I've got my sorrel boots on, my bathrobe, and a Remington 870 Wingmaster 12 gauge as I go out onto the porch. And so, yeah, I want you to imagine the whole thing. It was a whole Cousin Eddie kind of outfit is what it was. And so I go down, and I'm walking down, the ranch road, and I shine this mag light that I've got. I shine it, up into the cottonwood, and, just like Keith said, these 2 green eyes are looking back at me from up in that cottonwood. So I go down there and I get a little bit underneath the tree, and I'm looking up, and boy, she's backed up all against the trunk there like that, and she's snarling at me and everything. And I had a little conversation with her and said, there are a lot of ranchers around here that would just shoot you right off the bat, okay? But I'm not that guy, all right? And I'm gonna give you a chance, but you gotta stay away from my horses. I don't wanna come down and find a big hunk taken out of them or something like that. You need to move on, and just, head on down the road, and you and I'll get along, and it'll all be okay. And so then I just turn around and start to walk away. I turn, and as I'm turning, I see this cat just out of the corner of my eye go like this. Make 2 steps on that limb towards me. And I swung back around with that shotgun, and I was like, oh no, let's not make that mistake either. That's also part of the bargain. I get to go back up to the house and you don't jump on me, okay? And I have to admit that, the fear that was in me had more to do with the outfit that I was wearing. I really didn't want to die in a bathrobe and sorrels, you know, and a big flaps up, you know, leather hat, you know, with a shotgun in my hands, because I knew, you know, that all the newspapers would publish that photograph, and that was just not how I really wanted to go like that. But yeah, it's amazing how, you know, sometimes you see them a little close to home. Sometimes, like I have to admit.
Well, you know, they're actually the largest or the farthest roaming American mammal, because, you know, we have them from almost Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. And Jim Williams he's the guy who wrote Path of the Puma. He's a mountain lion biologist who studied them all the way from Canada down through the Andes. So they're, you know, they're very wide ranging. They're extremely adaptable. And I used to think, well, you know, they're really not dangerous. But in the past 20 years, they've become a little bit more dangerous because we've sort of pushed them to the fringe. Especially what happens is the older toms push the young males to the edge habitat, where they're seeing second homes built along rivers, and they're seeing children every day. And at some point, you know, they're not just curious, but they think, they very seldom go through with it. But we have had a couple people killed and eaten just in the past year, not in Montana, in Washington and Oregon. But I still love those cats. Huh? What's that, Craig?
It does happen. It does happen like that. But then also like that, not only in the naturalistic sense here too, like that, I couldn't help but think when I was reading your book also, I kept thinking of Walter Van Tilburg Clark's Track of the Cat, that classic old Western Track of the Cat, you know, that, you know, boy, there as a dramatic effect, you know, boy, they can, you know, just listening to that recording. I mean, if the hair doesn't like stand up on the back of your neck, you know, listening to that, then you need to check the hair on the back of your neck, maybe. I don't know. So.
I feel like it's also a great way to set the mystery, because that sound is so human. It's like, is this an animal or is this a human? Like, where's the monster?
Well, you know, I found out one thing that Craig and I had in common as well, and I did not know this. I did not know how much you wrote about Basque people and sheep herders, because I have a sheep herder in mind, except he's a Peruvian sheep herder, which we seem to have a few of around here. And I don't think they have, you know, they come from very poor circumstances. So they work on those 3-year visas that you're talking about. But they do it, I have one person maybe being the victim.
Yeah, for me, it was interesting like that, because I mean, whenever I started learning about the political aspects there was a point in time, I guess, you know, here a couple of years back, like that, when, you know, you could not get a visa into the United States. I think it might've been an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal. And they said the only livelihood that would automatically get a visa into the United States was sheep herder. If you were a sheep herder, you got an automatic visa and could come right into the United States, like it can go to work immediately. And I thought it was interesting also, you know, you were talking about the trials and tribulations like of these individuals, because they really are, you know, in a difficult situation where, you know, you're up there isolated to such a frightening degree like that. And some of the living conditions that these individuals have to put up with, you know, are kind of stunning in many ways.
And they're working 24/7. They're not working 8 or 10 days or 8 or 10 hours a day. They're at work all day and all night long. I've met one so far, and he was a very interesting guy. Wanted to go back to Peru and become a dentist, and he only had about 6 teeth, you know, in his head as it was.
It was kind of a physician heal thyself kind of thing.
Right. I put his Bible in the story. I did
Go for
want
it,
to ask you have the wolf in this, which is sort of almost like a mystical realism. And I just wondered why you injected that or introduced that wolf, 388B or whatever he is.
It was kind of interesting to me, like that, the effect that, you know, I mean, it's a very much a hot topic issue, you know, here in the Intermountain West. You know, people generally either fall on one side or the other, you know, on the wolf situation. And so for me, it was, you know, an opportunity to, you know, kind of take on something that was topical. But then again, also, you know, to deal with something and try and deal with it, you know, so you could hear both sides of, you know, the argument, you know, in that one. And then also it was just a question of, and I know you know how this is, you start doing the research on something and suddenly it starts eating your book. Suddenly, you're just, you find yourself reading more and more and more. And like, one of the big issues for me was to discover, just how much of human society is based, off of things that we've learned, from, our first, interactions, with those canine species, from all of those, millennia ago. Look at, and how much of our social systems, how much of our hunting, how much of all of these things, are not really primate, activities. Like that, they're really more to do, with what it is that we've learned, from those pack animals. Like that, and then, in your book, like that, very interesting too, like that, because, but the big cats are much more isolationistic. They tend to be, much more of an isolated, on their own, type of killer. And hunter like that. And so it really is interesting to me to see the differences, between the two like that. And, to see the response, that a lot of small communities make. I mean, for Walt like that, to have this wolf scare, in the Bighorn Mountains and to have a lot of people, losing their minds, and all of this, they even talk about it at one point in time because they come upon a kill that's a sheep kill that's a mountain lion like that. And they're like,
That's
well,
right. Yeah. And then you have a mountain lion introduced towards the end of the book.
yeah, and it's interesting to do a comparison contrast as to what the responses are, to that type of thing like that. So, that's I think, kind of what you were talking about as far as like something that we both feel very strongly about. I mean, one thing we don't do is just, try and write books where we're stacking up bodies like cordwood. The old statement I think is that, if you have something, if the book slows down, you have somebody come into the room, with a gun. The Raymond Chandler remark, like, and if it's a big problem in the plot, make it a big gun. I'm not a big follower of that. I think, that you kind of have to find some key elements, within the book, the idea of the book before you even start it to kind of hold your interest, because in many ways, I'm pretty sure you feel the same way I do about this in that, it's a mountain you're going to have to climb, and it's going to take the better part of a year to climb that mountain when you're writing that book. And so it better hold your interest, or else, boy, that's a devastating moment to come to whenever you get bored with your own book and you're only halfway through.
Well, I was on a panel with a writer who was a big time writer at the time, and because I'm older now, I can't quite remember his name. But I was sitting at the bar with him, and we ordered a glass of wine or whatever. And I said, "Well, do you have any advice for me?" At that point, I'd written maybe 3 books. He says, "No." He says, "You're doing great." He says, "My only advice is that, a book takes up 10 months of your life anyway." He said, "You better make it about something that means something to you." And he says, "You may be working your divorce out on the page, and the divorce is not mentioned, but make it something that has relevance and you want to do." And that's why I wanted to do the line. I also wrote a book, where wolves were the major characters. And when they first opened up a general wolf season in Idaho, which is where they first did it, I went down there and interviewed the guy who shot the first wolf. And I knew Ed Bangs, who introduced the wolves, and then the guy who's the wolfer, who caught the wolves and later had to kill some of them. And it's like you said, people get very emotional about it, but I realize that it's a very complex subject, and every drainage in our state and probably every drainage in your state and in Idaho, they have a different dynamic at work. On the East Fork of the Bitterroot, they have a high density of predators, including mountain lions and black bears. And adding the wolf is a little bit of a tipping point in the elk herd strength. And that also happened in the northern Yellowstone. A lot of other places, the elk react by having more calves. There are actually more elk after the wolf came, but the wolf changes the behavior of the elk. And so hunters are upset because the elk are no longer easy to find. But in any case, it's a very, like a lot of these, it's a very, very complex subject.
We have a term for that type of hunting. We call that type of person a vent window hunter, where they open the vent window enough to stick the barrel of the gun out. They don't want to lower the whole window because it would be too cold. Look at, so yeah, that's
Well, you both sort of mentioned this, your research process and falling into that research as you write the book. And we did have a question come through on the chat about that research, particularly as it pertains to some of the indigenous populations that your characters encounter along the way. And the questioner was curious how you researched those spiritual traditions, those historical incidences, and the sort of modern way of life that those communities are facing.
Well, Craig has a much more of an Indian presence in his books than I do. I do have one of my major characters, Harold, is Indian, and he actually took over to become more or less the main character in A Death in Eden. And I had a young Indian man live with us for a while, and I sort of modeled that character after him. But then I have people that I run my books by, or my ideas by. Marcia Small is one, she's Northern Cheyenne, and Joe McGashik in particular, who you might know, he's sort of like the Indian liaison with MSU, and he's from the Fort Peck Reservation. And I find one thing that's interesting is if I write a passage in which I have Harold talking or whatever, I think, well, I don't want to be what's called pan-Indian, or there's a name for it, where you sort of lionize Indians because you're a white man who wants to be an Indian. And it's interesting, almost every time I ask him a question, he opts for something that is more, not stereotypical, but more Indian. Rather than, so I don't know what to do. But anyway, my way of dealing with it is I run everything by people. But Craig has a much larger presence with Indians in his books.
Yeah, for me, it's pretty simple like that. I mean, whenever you're doing this kind of work like that, I kind of tend to fall back on, there's a great quote from Wallace Stegner, who was a writing instructor there at Stanford for all those years and a magnificent writer himself, Angle of Repose and a number of other novels that he wrote that were just spectacular. And he taught, and one of the statements he said is the greatest piece of fiction ever written is the disclaimer at the beginning of every book. It says nobody in this book is based off anybody alive or dead, like that. And I got to admit that, for me, to a great extent, that's pretty much the case. Also, I can go through my books, and it's just so much easier, to track, a character down whenever you have people that you can utilize like that. And the same goes with my native friends, like up on the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow Reservation. I can go through the list of, just about all of the characters that are in my books and, give you the exact equivalence of, the exact person they're based off of. Henry's based off of my good friend, Marcus Red Thunder, who's going to be here having dinner tomorrow night. Dina Minicamps, as Mandy Smoker brought us. Charles, a little old man, is Lonnie Littlebird, like that. And it's easier that way, like that, because you can summon up those voices, I think, a lot easier if you know exactly who it is, that you're talking about. And yeah, and the big thing for me also with that is that, if I'm going to write, about those people, that I need to make sure that I get it right. And something that, that's respectful like that, but honest, in my portrayal of them like that, because, I'm not Northern Cheyenne, okay, and so it's very important that I make sure that I get those things correct. But it's too much of a temptation. They're too fabulous. Like they're my neighbors, they're my friends. Some of them, practically family. And so, to not include them in the books, would not be a way of giving you an honest portrayal of, where it is, that I am and who I am. I mean, the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow Reservation are immediately to the north of my ranch. Like, and so to not include them in the books, would be, it would be kind of mean-spirited. Like, I don't think I would want to do that. And then whenever I find myself writing books, that have something to do, distinctly with those with the natives, it's important that I make sure that they have a say and have a voice in my books. Like at the next one that's coming out is called The Next to Last Stand, which has a lot to do with the Bighorn battlefield and and Custer and Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and all of that. And obviously there were two sides to that particular story. It's important that I make sure that I give those voices a chance to come forward like that and have their say. Like that, I remember it was fun for me like that because I was talking to Charles, who's a tribal elder in the Northern Cheyenne, and I made the mistake of saying, there weren't any survivors, of the little bighorn, and he smiled and he goes, "Yes, Craig, there were thousands of survivors. They just didn't happen to be white." Okay, and so it was I kind of got set back in my heels, and had to start all over again, like with my question. But that's the opportunity. That's the idea of like being able to approach an idea, maybe with a different kind of mindset, which is what Keith, does so well, like that, trying to find an access point to an idea like that and trying to do something a little bit different.
Do you find it's easier for you to write, to advance a plot or write your dialogue when you have Longmire on the same page with Vic or Henry?
Yeah, there are characters, that you pull like a gun, like that
Right.
they're gonna elevate, the dialogue, the excitement, But I mean, in many ways, when you write a book, and I'm sure, you feel the same way that I do about this. Like whenever I'm teaching classes, I'm always telling students, that basically you get to describe a character one time.
Okay.
You get to physically describe that character one time. But the differentiation of the voice of that character is going to be infinitely more important. Each one of those characters has to have a very distinctive voice, hopefully to the point that you don't have to tell the reader constantly, who it is that's talking. They should be able to tell as soon as that character opens their mouth, who it is like that. And, for me, that makes writing a book in many ways almost like conducting a choral group. It's almost like you're giving those voices their say in every one of your novels. And obviously there will be some characters that are going to come to the fore because they have an access to whatever story it is that you happen to be telling. You mentioned Land of Wolves and the Basque that were in that. Well, obviously I've got one deputy in the Absaroka County Sheriff's Department who speaks fluent Basque, Santiago Cesar Batorio. Well, I knew that he was going to be a much bigger player, in this particular book. But that's the fun of writing the books, with an ensemble kind of characters, is that you can have an ebb and a flow, of those different characters and bring some of them, back and circle back around and bring them more to the fore whenever you start writing those books.
Well, when I was developing characters for my first book, really what I was doing was trying to surround myself with people I'd like to hang out with. Because I was working for Field and Stream to make a living. And I would, God knows how many articles and narratives and everything else I wrote each year, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens. And I'll usually get 4 or 5 things a year that I really enjoyed doing. The Wolf Thing, for example, or long narrative pieces about my family or my son or someone like that. And so for me, it was a bit of an escape. And the character, but I admit the characters just sort of invent themselves to a degree. Like I got to the second chapter of the Royal Wolf Murders, which was the first book, and I thought, okay, I need a sheriff. I don't even know if it's going to be a man or a woman at that point. And I just sat there, and in 5 minutes, I thought, okay, it's a woman. Her name is Martha Ettinger. I'm naming her after my best friend Karen, whose name is Ettinger, Karen Ettinger. And she looks like a pig farmer I know named Gwen Peterson, who has a pig farm on the Yellowstone River. I just subtract 30 years from her. And I've got Martha Ettinger, and I even have her backstory in my head. Boy, I wish that happened all the time, but it doesn't. But anyway, that was one example of that.
If you had to give a percentage to the characters that are that come from your lived experience versus the ones that you just sort of invent out of nothing, what percentage do you think you would divide?
Boy, for me, it's got to be 60 or 70% of people that I knew. Some of them I use their real names. I try to figure out, are they going to sue me or not? And if I don't think they're going to sue me, I just use their names. Like I made a guy named Drick, a bad guy in the last book. It's my old college roommate, Drick Boyd. And he says, when are you going to make me into one of your villains? I said, well, I'll do it the next book.
Perfect.
I'm probably a higher percentage than that. Like if I'm to be honest, I would say about 90% of the characters in my books, and it's, a lot of times it may not be, like full blown, from the head of Zeus. It might be, a kind of a Dr. Frankenstein kind of thing like that, where you take bits and pieces of a number of different people like that and collect them together to make the character that you need to tell the story that you're going to tell. But a lot of times it can be just the smallest thing like that. There was a fella that I knew who he had a habit of, like, whenever he would talk to you, he never looked you in the eye. He would always look at your shoulder like that, or something like that. He never looked you in the eye like that. And so I made him a doctor. He was a brain specialist like that in one of the books like that, because basically what he dealt with was the electrical circuitry of the human brain like that. And my theory is that that lightning rods don't look you in the eye, and and that kind of thing can inform a character like that, and it can carry all the way through like that for you. And sometimes it can just be the smallest thing like that informs, but they need to be there. Something needs to be there.
Well, another percentage thing was very early on, my agent told me, he says, your books are sort of split 60-40. You have two main characters and a sort of 60% Sean, 40% Martha. He says, that's usually not a good idea. It's usually better to be 80-20 or 70-30, but mine were like that. And Craig's, I think your people go in and out each book on how much sort of weight is with that character. And that's sort of what I do too. It changes every book.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if you have the same amount of the same characters in every book, you're basically writing the same book.
The same book. Right.
So for me, like that, I mean, they're I don't know. I'd be interested to hear, Keith, from you, like at what your answer to this question is. But I always get there are two types of emails that I get after every book. The first one is, you beat up on Walt too much in the last book. You need to take it easy on him and let him have like a good coasting book here and not get hurt. And then the other one was, there was not enough of my favorite character, whether it would be Vic or Henry or even the dog. I knew I was getting to a certain point in my career when people said there wasn't enough dog in the last book. So in Land of Wolves, I was able to get a lot of dog.
There's a lot of dog in that book.
So,
well, you're the one that
emails do you get? What kind of questions or what kind of criticisms or things do people want, that when you change the books up a little bit with each novel?
Well, I do have fans of Chody, Sean's dog. And you're the one, I think you're the one that told me this years ago, that, okay, maybe you can kill off a semi-major character once in a while, but you better not kill that dog.
No.
And that's the reason, for one reason. And the other thing is, if you put the dog in the book, where's the dog? So I used to have in them, like the margins, where's the damn dog? Is he in the teepee? Is he at Martha's house? Is he with the Madison River Liars and Fly Tires Club on the river? Is he with Sean? He's somewhere, and you have to address that. It's the same way they'll say, well, you shouldn't, for whatever you do, don't marry your character off. There goes all the sexual tension. Well, that may be, but the real reason is, if I have a wife, or, well, not me, but my character or Craig, or vice versa, that person exists somewhere. Well, where are they? If they're not part of the plot, if not part of the story, they can sort of slow the story down, but they have to be dealt with. I mean, Craig can move his daughter to the southern part of the state and get a few hundred miles there. but that's one thing. As a character, you have to be able to pick up and sort of do things on instinct. And one reason every book I tell myself, well, this is going to be Martha's book. This is going to be Martha's book. And so far it isn't, although I swear it will be the next time. And part of the reason is, and Craig doesn't have to deal with this in the sense that the Montana I write about is different than the Wyoming he writes about. It's in a flux, it's more in change. We're going from an mining interest to a state that runs on trout slime, or at least the Madison does. And so I I just have to be aware of that. Anyway.
The old joke that I used to hear like that was the differences between Wyoming and Montana is in every small town in Montana, there are 2 churches and 1 bar. In every small town in Wyoming, there are 2 bars and 1 church. Like that. So that's as far as I know the difference.
That's a good way of putting it. You can go to White Sulphur Springs where there used to be like 15 bars and, 3 blocks.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting thing. I don't know, Jessica, if you were going to ask that, how the locations that we write about differ quite a bit. Craig's West that he writes about are these huge, vast, big counties like Bighorn County in Wyoming, very small population, not nearly as much subdivision, a lot of old ranches. And it's a perfectly legitimate locale to write about because it exists. But I sort of came to the game a little bit late, and Craig was, doing his thing in Wyoming, and C.J. Box had his guy in Wyoming, his game warden. I told him once, I said, well, I'm the one that should write about game warden. My uncle was a game warden. I used to work for him. Anyway, but the Montana that I live in has changed dramatically just in the past 20 years, for that matter. So the valleys I write about are, they're being subdivided, sold to outside interests. And you have all kinds of people living next door to each other. You can have a state senator living next door to a medical marijuana provider, living next door to a waitress, to a fishing guide. And so I thought, well, I will put that dynamic. I mean, that's what I know. I used to say, well, all walks of life walk together there because we still have, 1 million people per state the size of California. When I moved here, if you didn't have friends who were outside your socioeconomic circle or whatever, you didn't have friends because there are few people. I think that's changing now to a degree, but that's the real difference between the Wes Craig writes about and the one I do. It'll come to where he is too eventually, I'm sure. But anyway, I've learned don't kill the dog.
Don't kill the dog.
Don't kill the dog.
In Montana especially, like, because I've worked in Montana like for years and years and years, cowboying up there like that, and to see the changes or that I-90 corridor, to see how much of it has changed, and I don't know. I mean, there seems to be maybe a little bit more of a varied economy. You were talking about how people have to have like 2 or 3 different jobs or something like that to be able to survive. In one of your previous events, and that definitely is the case in Wyoming. I mean, we don't have the population base that Montana does, and so there's not as much of a varied, kind of economy where we are, and so that's a big difference, and I think, I mean, obviously, where it is that I am, it's definitely a much more agrarian based, society, at very, very large ranches. There are only 23 counties, in the whole state of Wyoming. And, we're the 9th largest state. I mean, we have counties that are as big as Maryland. And so, a lot of these poor sheriffs, they're stretched, pretty thin as far as what they have to deal with and the things that they have to contend with. And that was for me, I guess, one of the reasons why it is that I chose a sheriff and saw him as that kind of a character. I mean, I thought it was very interesting also, whenever I read your first book, Keith, that you'd chosen, it's something that obviously, you were very, very, well acquainted with, a fishing guide being, more of a sleuth, along those lines. And the interesting thing for me is I think the grand master of that was another Montana writer by the name of oh, good grief. My goodness. James Grady's, his book, 3 Days of the Condor. Well, I always use it as an example, whenever I'm talking about the introduction of the innocent. There's a character here who is, not an expert. He's not a field spy but I think what James did there, with that particular novel all those years ago, was to introduce that innocent character, which allows you to, introduce the information to the reader in a very reasonable way. He doesn't know that information, and so he's relaying it to the reader at the same time that the protagonist is learning that information. One of the major differences there is, I'm dealing with a sheriff, who's been a sheriff, for 25, 30 years, and so a lot of this comes second nature to him. And so it puts me at a little bit of a disadvantage sometimes, whenever I'm trying to explain or find a way to explain that information. And one of the things I think that, James did so well, and one of the things that you do, Keith, is have that opportunity to have that introduction of the innocent, and then also have a high context kind of relationship, with the environment too.
Oh yeah, I have to be constantly remind myself that my Montana, or the Montana I know, is a very important character in the books, just like Bighorn County is in your books, although you call it Absarki or Absorki, or there's must be 20 pronunciations of that.
There are. They're about, I think it's a Crow word, for themselves. It's the children of the long-beaked bird. But yeah, it's all oral tradition. So there are about 5 different pronunciations. And every once in a while, somebody will take me to task and say, that's not the way it's pronounced. And I'm like, yeah, it's a fictitious county. So yeah, that's the way it's pronounced, I guess.
Right. Well, it's pronounced this way, but I made up a car or a truck model called a Chevy Absorki or Absaroka. And so Rick Holmes, the actor who narrates my books, will call me, well, how do I pronounce that? So we agree, well, it's really pronounced this way, but a truck ad would never call it that. They would call it Absaroka or Absaruka or whatever. So we got that on that end. But one.
Did you get any money from Chevrolet on that? Did you get any funding from Chevrolet from that?
I was hoping for it. I was hoping for a truck. I got no truck. I thought it was a really good scene that I'd written too, but anyway. But one of the reasons that I held off, or that I haven't had Martha be the main character, is because she's a sheriff of a more populous area than where Longmire is. So if you have a police force of 50 or 75 people, the sheriff just doesn't have the opportunity to get out there and sort of be a lone wolf, whereas Longmire still can be a lone wolf. So one recent thing you were going to ask about characters is, well, Sean Stranahan, if you don't really have a day job, then you're free to get out there and do stuff. And so it's easier for me to put wheels under him and take him around the country than it would be for Martha. So I might have her lose an election. Then she can, who knows, maybe.
Here's my next question though. Are there any female sheriffs in Montana?
Not that I know of. There are like 54 in the entire United States of America. I think I put that in my last book. You could put them every female sheriff in a double door garage. And a number of them have not been elected, but they're, because of their state's bylaws or whatever, if the sheriff dies, they can put the wife in his place. And so she inherits the job. Strange, but it's true, I guess. But no, there aren't very many women sheriffs, and to my knowledge, there are none in Montana.
Yeah, we haven't had any in Wyoming yet, and I keep hoping that we won't, because I've still got Vic, waiting in the wings,
That's right. You got Vic.
Parent, and if someone gets elected, they're going to steal my thunder, and I don't know what I'm going to do about that. So,
well, the physical appearance of a sheriff also sort of changes in the sense that when you have your lone wolf guys like Longmire, historically, at least as far as I've read, they often were big guys because they are alone out there. Now today in Gallatin County, Martha Ettinger, she doesn't have to be big or strong because that's no longer, other people can be big and strong. But
well, and that's also a very politically oriented, area. And so, you have to be, so connected with the community, and you have to be, responsible. I mean, it's always fun like that because, I know we both have the same French publisher, Oliver Gaumeister, over in France. And I don't know about you, but one of the things I'm always trying to explain is that, that sheriffs are actually an elected law enforcement position here in the United States. And the French look at us like we're crazy. They're like, you got to be kidding. They're a police officer that you elect? That's just rife, with some kind of nepotism and all kinds of horrible things. And I'm like, yeah, it can be. Yeah, sometimes.
Well, I'm lucky I have my wife to translate the letters that I get from France and help me respond to them. I recently did one for a magazine in France. And this guy who, did the Zoom with me is just sitting there in his underwear, smoking a cigar. Anyway, it was just a wonderful time talking to him, but he was hard to understand.
Yeah.
And I'm hard of hearing out of my right ear anyway. But I had a good time with him.
Well, how would you?
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Keith.
No, I say that's actually one of the biggest rewards of the job, I think, is the relationships that you form with the reader, well, the booksellers, but also the readers. Because I worked for Field and Stream for 40 years. I still do, and they would impress me saying, well, any one of your articles is read by more people than read John Cheever in his lifetime. But there's 12 to 14 million pass along readership. That's enormous. So the magazine stood between you and those readers, though, so that you weren't really aware of them as much. And part of it was some of your readers were incarcerated. A lot of my fans were. I remember talking to one guy, saying, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Well, where'd you see the magazine?" He said, "Well, it's under the cot." He said, "You're big in the state pen." What a great compliment,
It's a ready-made blurb right there. Keith McCafferty, the #1 author in Montana, Deer Lodge. Look at that.
But I started writing the novels, and even though far fewer people read them, there's no veil or curtain in between. And so you develop, you get all this response. Well, Craig gets many times more than I do, maybe to the point where he almost gets too much. But so it's at first I thought, well, I don't know how to feel about this. And I thought, well, no, it's very valuable, because for me anyway, writing the books is really, really hard. Because I try to do like Craig did. I try to, make the best story I can do each time a new story. It's very, very difficult. And if you get a letter from a reader that day, just, most of them are very complimentary and just telling you what you meant to them or whatever, then you can take a little bit of confidence back to the book you're writing. Right now, I've got a reader. Now, this is a great reader, Craig. This is a guy named Mike Harrell, who's a master bamboo rod maker. Ooh. And so he's making me a bamboo fly rod that's worth about $2,500. And he sent me,
Keith, all you're doing is you're just doing this author thing to help support your fishing habit. That's all you're really doing here. You're not fooling anybody.
You didn't get the truck, though.
I did the truck, but I've had, well, I shouldn't even say this on, I should, sure I should. But I've had, people have offered to have me sign various parts of their bodies. I've had 2 women who said, well, you can sign the tops of my breasts and with a magic marker. I'm thinking, I don't know, Their husbands will be right there. And say, no, it's okay, it's okay. And I think, no.
Yeah, no, I send them right over to Robert Taylor. I send them right over to Robert Taylor and Lou Diamond Phillips and Bailey Chase and all those guys. They much would rather have an actor, than they would an author like that.
Yeah, well, I don't have an actor, so.
Well, we did have a Facebook question come in that was curious if Sean is ever going to get his own TV show.
Well, I know that a couple of my books have been with Hollywood agents, but as of now, no, he's more worried just about, is he going to get married to Martha or not, and how that's going to affect his life. But no, I mean, nice. I'm certainly open to the idea, but unfortunately, that hasn't occurred yet.
To accompany that question, Craig, there was also curiosity if the Longmire movie had moved anywhere.
We're still waiting, to see what's going to happen. I mean, we find ourselves in a kind of a unique position in the sense that, we never lost our audience, and we never failed, to, we were the highest rated scripted drama that, in cable, the cable network, that we were in. We're still one of the top 20 shows on Netflix, which is really kind of wonderful. And so after 6 seasons like that, we've kind of become a little bit of victims of our own success. The cable network that we were with, they wanted to buy the show. Warner wouldn't sell it like that. And then we went on Netflix and did 3 seasons with them. And then, Netflix wanted to buy it and Warner still wouldn't sell it like that. And so we're kind of in a limbo kind of situation situation like that. But one of the nice things that's happened here in the last year or so, Warner Brothers made the announcement that they're going to be doing their own streaming service, their own platform. And so we're waiting to see what's going to happen with that, because it would behoove them, it seems to me, to take one of the highest rated scripted dramas they ever had and, maybe kind of, revamp it again, for their own streaming service. So we'll wait and see what happens. I'm cautiously, hopeful that, that you'll see us again on the screen. But in the meantime, I'm pretty happy with writing the books. I'm a cowboy author in a town of 25. And I think in the pre-show, when we were talking before, I'm just now coming to the conclusion that I've been living my life in quarantine for the last 17 years. I just haven't been aware of it is all.
It's a nice situation. Do you feel like you're being more productive in this current climate with your writing, either of you?
Yeah. Well, I never felt any of the depression. It was sort of like Craig. It's like, well, this is what I do anyway. All I did was buy an espresso machine. So I bought a good espresso machine because, I was one of those writers who would write out of coffee shops. And that was part of my social life. Part of it was I just didn't want to be in the house because the house was too lonely after the kids were gone. I said, well, when does that empty nest syndrome kick in? It kicks in the day your youngest child leaves. I come home, and snake, cat, it's too quiet. So that part I missed, but I had to finish up this book that was just published, going back and forth with galleys and, all the back and forth that happens, which is sort of all encompassing. And then I'd written most of a book about growing up in Appalachia. And so I wanted to start, writing on that again before I immediately had to jump back into the series book. So for me, I feel fortunate in that I don't think it's really been that different for me. More different from my wife, who was a daily journalist for 44 years and just retired last Monday. That's a real,
congratulations.
Yeah, that's a real change, and so she'll miss to some degree the camaraderie of going into a newsroom every day, which she's been doing for half a century. Whereas I'm always been writing by myself, sitting by a river, writing on my lap, or on a bridge over a river, or anywhere but the house. That's what I do. So it doesn't, the quarantine is, I realize it's hurt a lot of people around the world. And I would like to get out a little bit more and travel and not try to recognize people behind their face masks, but it is what it is, as we've been told. What about you, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of, I guess, isolationistic, kind of lifestyle that writers, become used to. I kind of enjoy the fact that, I'm alone, I'm by myself. I mean, I've got two other projects that are, have gotten a little bit of traction out in Los Angeles, and, anytime you're dealing with Hollywood, it's always, everything's by committee. And so, it kind of reminds you how refreshing and wonderful it is whenever you're sitting in a room by yourself, typing about your imaginary friends. You're pretty much on your own at that point in time, and you can, do what it is that you need to do. And that isolation is kind of important to me. I mean, there's a reason why it is that I live in a town of 25. That isolation, I think, provides a focus for what it is that I do for a living.
Nice. Well, do you gentlemen feel like you have a couple moments for some questions from the audience?
Sure.
All right. Well, we've had a couple of questions for you, Keith, about the change in cover art for Bangtail Ghost, and where that came from, and if it's going to go back to the more illustrated versions for the paperback.
Oh, I have no idea whether it will do that. I've only had one book change its cover from hardcover to softcover. That was the Gray Ghost Murders, where they had the picture of the fly on it, and they were afraid that it might confuse too many potential women readers. So instead they put a skull, as if, okay, well, that's going to really get them, Well, I was always surprised at how much input I had into the covers. They generally send me a cover idea I hated, and then a second one, oh God, this is horrible. And then maybe by the third one, I felt like we were sort of on the same page, and we go back and forth for a month and come up with it. And they were sort of a throwback to old National Geographic something else. This is what people told me, or national parks.
Mm-hmm.
This one was Catherine Court, the former publisher and president of Penguin, who retired last year. She was my editor, and she was Craig's editor. Wonderful, wonderful woman. Without her, I don't know what I'd still be writing about hunting elk or something. Anyway, she decided that one of the few things that they can do as a publisher, one thing they can do is change art, and in other words, to try to get more of a readership. So they decided to go in this direction, and I had people who say, "Well, no, you can't, because your book covers are so striking, and and they've been one of the biggest selling points." But they did, and like I said, I think beforehand, maybe if the only contribution I made to this book is the color of the eyes. I thought it was a very, very beautiful looking book from the start. The publishing and advertising, all that angles to it, I'm not part of. Yeah, so it's really pretty. I'm scared. No.
You've encountered the eyes in real life, though. Sort of circling back to that idea of real life influence on your books. Have you ever put conversations that you've had with people in your books?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Well, I've definitely had some of the conversations with my crusty old fishing guide, Sam. I know I've had those conversations. And I have in a couple other instances. People who aren't a part of my life, and then they come back after all these years, and you realize that those conversations sometimes will work into the book. That's one of the unusual things about writing, is that, and I'm sure this happens to Craig, you sort of reconnect with all these people that you've lost, or that you thought you'd lost, or that you hadn't thought about at all for 50 years or more. But because you're a writer and you're a semi-public figure, and especially like in Craig's case, these people say, well, hey, look what happened to Craig, well, I'm going to get in touch with him. And so I get some very interesting people who get in touch with me that way, or I get in touch with them. You do have to be careful, because when I write characters, I don't always have the exact names of the characters. So I put in somebody from my past. I have an old girlfriend, for example. And after you've gone through 3 or 4 rewrites, it's like the last part of the book. I'm not going to change it now, or you just forget. Then I get like, an email that'll say, Debbie Roush, class of 71, remember me? That's the extent of the email. It's like, oh shit, I made her a bad person. Anyway, she didn't see me. But so all this is by way of saying that I can't remember putting actual, conversation from the characters. Not in too many cases anyway. I hate to say no, but I haven't in that way.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. I always warn people when I'm signing their books, I'm always, the 30 seconds they're spending with me, they're taking their literary life in their hands, so it's a distinct possibility that anything they say can be used against them in the field of literature like that. And, boy, I hear a good line, or I hear a good statement, or, a good touch off point or for a conversation or something like that. I'm not ashamed. I'll use it. And it's just, it's too much of an opportunity for me. I have to.
No, I do that. I do use what, those kind of people say to me. But it's interesting. It's a very strange profession. And in some ways, I don't know if it's healthy. I think it's very healthy for Craig, because he loves what he does. He's very good at it, and he enjoys the process. which for me, it's like, it's really hard work. And sometimes I sort of get down on myself saying, well, I'm too old, I can't do this anymore or something. And so sometimes I'll go back and I'll write a long narrative magazine piece for the money, but also because it's like a piece of carpentry in the sense that it's done, because books are never done. They just take them away, as somebody famous once said, and as Craig had said, and I say that. So it's I'm not sure it's altogether healthy. And I started out as a newspaper reporter, a crime reporter, a nightside reporter. I had my finger on the heartbeat of the city. I knew everybody, knew all the cops, knew all the stories that weren't being told and why. And then thought, well, I always wanted to be the fishing editor of Field and Stream, so I became a magazine writer. And then you take a real big step back from humanity. You're not talking to people every day. And then you begin to write novels. Well, now you're quite isolated. So nobody tells you that when you start out. That's the way it's going to be. And so I promised this time around that the next book I write will not be the heartache that the one previous was, and the one before that. I'm like Willie Nelson. I said this one was the roughest, but I know I've said the same about them all. They're all really.
So coming from the news reporter background, and Craig, chime in also, do you start your books from knowing how they're going to end and then work backwards, or do you let the characters kind of help you discover what this resolution is going to look like?
Well, I'm very different from Craig. I know enough about Craig that he diagrams or plots his books fairly thoroughly before he begins them, and he does a lot of research before he begins them. And I wish I could be, I wish to be like Mike. I wish I could be like Craig. I'm lucky. I generally have I have a scene in mind that will get me started. If I'm lucky, I have the end, or at least something, towards the end. And then if I have that sort of backdrop issue to paint the story against, whether it's wolves or mountain lions or whirling disease or whatever, I consider that's enough to get started. So then I start writing the book scared to death, because with every word I write, I'm taking myself down a path that, might not lead anywhere. I have to go back. And so I'm what you call my agent calls me a muddler through, or a seat of the pants kind of writer. I try to keep some control, but basically after that first 20 pages, I'm just hanging on, and it's not productive, because, then every damn scene you write is contradicting something that you did. You got to go back and rewrite it. So by the time I finish the book, it's called a first draft, but my gosh, I must have rewritten it 30 times before I get the first draft. So I wish that I could do that. So I often do my research at the end, because I finally know what the book is about, so I know what to research. So I'm interested to hear what Craig will say.
Oh yeah, I think that we've all read. There's so many books that you read that they start so well like that, and they go so well, and then they get to the end and just crap out. I mean, it's good endings are tough, like that, and so I hate to leave that kind of thing to chance. I like to try and get as much information. And the other thing that I do, look at, some people have noticed, some people haven't, like that, but I tend to bookend my books. I mean, what Walt is dealing with at the beginning of the book is what will be happening to Walt at the end of the book, whether it happens to be graveside or, in the cold dish, he was watching the Canada geese, heading south, like that in the fall, and sees them again at the end of the book. And I try and do a cyclical kind of pattern to the books, and so the way that the book begins, I know there's going to be a physicality or a dialogue piece, set piece, or something that's going to be the same from the beginning to the end. And so yeah, I'm definitely one of those guys that likes to have a roadmap. I like to have a very detailed roadmap of everything that goes on throughout the entirety of the book. But on the other hand, I think you've also got to, you have to be open to the idea of the improvisational moments that are going to present themselves during the course of writing a book, because writing a book it's not a destination, it's a journey. You think you know what the book is going to be about, but as Keith said, the idea is going to evolve as you're going along like that. And what you discover, I think also is the more comfortable you become as a writer, and with that process, the more chances you'll take in being lured out onto that thin ice like that, and maybe seeing, where some of those ideas and some of those improvisational aspects of the book that you weren't aware of when you first started it, are going to go. And the wonderful thing about that is that if you can find a way to surprise yourself as a writer, then you've got an even chance of being maybe the possibility of being able to surprise the reader, which is always going to be something you're looking forward to.
Well, I also try to, have that sort of full circle thing or bookend. In Buffalo Jump Blues, I knew the book would start with Harold and the bison that fell over the cliff. And I knew it would end with him, with the bison. That's all I knew, but I knew that. I wish I could change and learn,
Some of us old dogs, it's not
But
a
I
good
tell
idea to
myself
start.
every book, do it right this time. You're a grown-up now. These are important people you're talking to. Be a grown-up. And then I back to my old ways. Anyway.
One of our listeners in the chat is curious if you have any regrets about a character you created, or do you ever second guess yourself? Keith, it kind of sounds like you maybe at least second guess the process.
Oh, absolutely, all the time. Well, I had to make a decision very, very early on. You have to make a lot of decisions. Is it going to be first person or third person? I thought I'd write my books in first person because I'd always done that. I start out and I'm writing it in third person. No thought process involved. But so what is it exactly you wanted to know, Jessica? I'm quite.
Any regrets about the characters you created?
Am I what?
Any regrets about the characters
you
the created?
The characters, but I also had to make a decision on locations. Do you keep everything exactly true to life? Well, if you do, you date yourself, or you date the book right away. So I decided to have some things fiction, some things, not fiction. And I don't, to this day, I don't know if it's a good idea. I have a mythical town of Bridger. Well, actually, there is a Bridger, Montana. It's very tiny. And I thought, in my naivety, well, that nobody would catch that. Well, believe me, it's like doing something wrong with horsemanship in your book. You're going to hear from a horseman. I heard from one at like midnight or 1 a.m, and my mother was ill at that point. I think, my mom died. This guy's calling me a bit. No. He just has issues with me on how I did a scene with horse tack or whatever, Well, I had a friend of mine who had helped me with that scene. A horseman, somebody who's ridden horses all around who's a fox chaser, back in England and Ireland, and they know horses. So really what I had was 2 horsemen arguing with each other. Because I didn't, But so you do have if I had that regret, if I had another regret, I think I would move my character from having grown up in Massachusetts to having grown up in upstate Michigan, where I did. Why did I do that? I don't know. I intended to have him, but then I got to writing and it ended up being somewhere else. The danger, see, that's the danger. That Craig can maybe skirt by a little bit by trying to have at least some idea what's going to happen.
Sometimes, but sometimes not. Like I don't know. As far as like regrets are concerned, I don't know. I was listening to Keith say like, I just climb on and see where it goes. We sound like a couple of rodeo riders, is what we sound like here. Like, and I gotta admit that's in many ways like that's the way I approach it. I mean, I climb on, I cinch up like it, and I hang on and just turn it loose and see where it goes. Like it, and I don't know. I don't have any regrets, in choices that I've made, in characters that I've come across with like that. very rapidly like I discovered that like a lot of the weaknesses or a lot of the problems that you view, or the things that you view as being problems or problematic, you know, to the writing process, in many ways they're really wonderful, like, that, and give you a lot of opportunities, like, and so, you know, sitting around and thinking, oh, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had done that. Nah, nah, I'm on the ride. Turn it loose, open the gate, here we go.
Yeah, as far as the characters, I don't have any regrets. And that's sort of lucky and good, because if you have a series where people continue to pay you money to lie for a living, as I call it, they're going to be around those characters, you know, one book to the next, just as Craig's characters are. Where it's really nice if you still have things to say about them and you like their company. What if you write somebody that you don't really like, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
Write
as
about
we
people you
wind
don't
down,
particularly like, but I mean, you know, I think you can write about people you don't particularly like, because then you're talking about the antagonists and all that type of thing. I think the big element there has to be, they have to be compelling. I mean, that's the thing. You know, you know, they can be good, they can be bad, they can be young, they can be old, they can be male, female, whatever. It doesn't matter. Like that, but they better be compelling. There better be something about them that makes, you know, your ear want to hear that dialogue, or your eye wants to stay, you know, with that character. Like at a lot of times, whenever I find myself, you know, whenever I'm watching a movie or I'm watching a TV show or something, you know, the performers like that I really enjoy are the ones that have something going on. You know, the wheels are turning, and you can see those wheels turning, and there's
so
a compelling quality.
is your approach like sort of cinematic, where you see your characters as you write the book? You see them moving through the country?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that, you know, I mean, I guess, you know, the king of that for me was John Steinbeck. I mean, you know, my gosh, you know, the guy, you know, if he wrote a grocery list, they made a movie out of it like that, because it was so easy. You know, the visual aspects of it, you know, were so, you know, cinematic. You know, it was there. It was right there on the page. Like it, and so you know, as one of my favorite writers, like, and I'm sure like that I kind of fall prey to kind of lining myself, you know, up behind Steinbeck, I have to admit.
No, that's a great man to do that with. I remember talking to the Steinbeck Society. They, you know, at his home there in California, where he grew up, they have a museum for him. I was trying to get permission to use a quote of his, which is always a really hard thing to do, because it's like, who owns that quote or who owns that lyric? It's very difficult to
Oh
find
yeah.
out sometimes.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I finally got some people at the Steinway, you know, and then it was very helpful, and I became a fan all over again. I still love Mac and the Boys, you know, in the Monterey book.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
well, I'm going to take, since we just have a few short minutes here, I'm going to combine two questions. Because one of my favorite questions, of course, is what are you reading? And one of our viewers was curious if you knew of anyone sort of up and coming to join you in the ranks of these sort of fun Western, cowboy, outdoorsman mysteries. Since we have you two, we have CJ Box and Nevada Bar.
What a character she is. Anyway, one of my favorite people.
Are you reading anything
I'm
similar or?
Michael Connolly, but you can't get any bigger or less Montanan than Michael Connolly. But I really do like him. And a friend of mine out of Missoula writes, Gwen Florio does, and Carrie Lasure. These are people who I know in Montana who are good writers. Carrie's a very good writer, and she's written a couple books. I don't know anybody else young that I'm reading right now. I have sort of a reading disability. It's very difficult. It's not an excuse, but it's hard for me to read one page to the next. I just sort of skip around. After 5 days. I've read the whole book, but not in any order. But I you know, like I wanted to read Craig's book. So for here, you know, because I wanted to read it. And so I read that straight through. But I can do that with my wife if I'm reading aloud to her, but it's tough for me to read. So I don't read that many novels right now for that reason. But yeah, Carrie and Gwen. Craig?
A couple of titles to keep in mind, like if there's one called Winter Count that should be coming out here most recently, like that's a wonderful, wonderful book. Another would be The Only Good Indian. is a marvelous, like it's kind of a horror, piece, like that, from a wonderful writer from down in Denver way, like that. But yeah, I'm reading a lot of native literature right now, like that, because I kind of tend to, when you're working on a book, you kind of tend to reinforce what you're writing by maybe reading books from authors like that are like at least on the same ground, that you're not that you would use any of their material or try and copy them in any way, but there's a tone and there's a feel to those books like that I think is absolutely marvelous. These are two very incredible native writers like it, but see if you can find those out there, like at Winter Count being one, and The Only Good Indian like as another, as floating around out there. And then one of the things that Keith didn't mention also that gets in the way of being able to read is research. There's this thing called research that you have to do, like, and so an awful lot of your time is spent, doing research. And boy, I got to tell you, like at writing the Next to Last Stand, I have read every Custer and Little Bighorn book that's out there, and I got to tell you, there are a lot of really bad Custer and Little Bighorn books that are out there. A lot of the more historical ones are just painful, to read like that. But then there are the ones that are absolutely spectacular. Nathaniel Philbrick's the Last Stand, the James Welch book, and Killing Custer. Like I mean, you get on these these tirades like that, literarily, and it's a fabulous thing to be able to do like that, because it takes you down trails that you wouldn't normally read, maybe like that, or ones that seem maybe a little intimidating. Like I've always looked at the Little Bighorn and Custer as being a mountain that I was going to have to climb at some point in time, but I would kind of kept pushing it off, into the distance like that. And then finally, when it came time to write this book, I had to sit down and start doing that research. But a lot of really wonderful writers that are coming up right now. Sean Cosby, from over in Virginia, a marvelous writer like that's got a new book out, and it's always a joy to see these younger writers that are coming up with these absolutely magnificent books that give you hope, that they're trying to change the genre just a little bit, like, and not doing the same old like that, and that's always a joy. Just the same way it's always a joy to get a Keith McCafferty book.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry
I want to
that
point out, though, I have one point to make here. Like, and I would like to point out that I have to move some items here, like that, and make some space, like for my computer here. These are some really wonderful flies that were tied for me by an absolutely wonderful writer. Like, and I have not received my new fly for the new book. I just thought that I would point that out before I move on.
You have a new fly. And you've got a Madison River Liars and Fly Tires hat.
Hey, look at that.
No, I'm serious. So they should be there within 10 days or so.
Thank you. He sends me, and then he tells me only in an emergency do you break the glass and actually use them. And so I haven't ever broken the glass.
Okay, real good. You'll have to have Judy email me your address again.
No problem.
To send something to.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know that there are several questions that we weren't able to get to. So do be sure to check out both Keith and Craig's websites. It looks like those were dropped into the chat, but CraigAllenJohnson.com and KeithMcCafferty.com to submit your questions directly to the source. And don't forget to just pop into booksandcommonnw.com to purchase your copy of the new books. And it's not too late to pre-order Next to Last Stand from Craig Johnson. And of course, Country Bookshelf has signed copies of Bangtail Ghost, but you can get them. You can get just a regular copy from any of our sponsoring stores, Paulina Springs in Sisters and Madison Books in Seattle. We are so grateful to the two of you for joining us this evening. It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week, or actually we'll see you later this week. On Thursday, Books in Common is welcoming two naturalists, Daniel Matthews and Valerie Trout, to share books on trees and climate change. So if you're interested, we'll hope to see you again in a couple days. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks, Keith.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Wonderful to see you.